She gave us Katniss Everdeen. She gave us the Mockingjay. She gave us Panem, a dystopia so haunting it became a mirror for our own world. But Suzanne Collins herself, she's remained almost invisible. While her books sold more than 100 million copies and her films raked in billions, Collins stayed off red carpets, rarely gave interviews, and built a reputation as one of the most private mega authors alive. This video is the full story. Every rise and fall, every quiet triumph, and every controversy that's followed her. We'll uncover how a children's television writer transformed into one of the best-selling authors on the planet, how her father's military service planted the seeds for Panem's brutal reality, and how Greek mythology, Roman gladiators, and modern reality TV all fused together into a story that changed the world. We'll break down the massive contracts, the billion-dollar film adaptations, and the crushing weight of success that drove Collins into years of silence. We'll dig into the critics who accused her of glorifying violence, the fans who crowned her the queen of YA dystopia, and the skeptics who wondered if she could ever write another book. And we'll explore her shocking return with the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the record-breaking release of Sunrise on the Reaping, and the upcoming blockbuster film that could once again dominate the cultural conversation. Suzanne Collins has lived her life in the shadows while creating one of the most recognizable worlds in modern fiction. But today, those shadows are gone. This is Suzanne Collins Exposed. The secrets, the battles, and the truth behind the woman who turned rebellion into an empire. Picture a little girl on the move, packing boxes again, another base, another unfamiliar city. Her father wears a U.S. Air Force uniform, her mother keeps the household steady, and Suzanne Collins is left to find her place in a world defined by discipline, history, and constant change. Suzanne Marie Collins was born on August 10, 1962 in Hartford, Connecticut, the youngest of 4 children. Her father, Michael Collins, was a Vietnam veteran and military historian who believed in telling his kids the unvarnished truth about war. Her mother, Jane, gave her children the space to imagine, read, and create. Between the weight of conflict and the light of storytelling, Suzanne's life became a balancing act from the start. Moving frequently to Washington, D.C., the American South, and even Brussels, she absorbed fragments of culture and conflict wherever she went. In Belgium, reminders of past wars were etched into the streets themselves. That exposure to both the reality of violence and the resilience of people facing it would mark her forever.
When I was a child, my dad fought in Vietnam. The year I was 6, he was gone for the whole year. He was career Air Force, he was a historian, he was a doctor of political science, he was a military specialist, but he was also in the Air Force. And so I can distinctly remember when I was 6 years old, my mother tried to shield us from newscasts because we were little.
Collins has admitted her father never softened the lessons of his service. He taught me about military strategy and the consequences of war long before I fully understood them. To a child, those conversations were sobering, but they planted the seeds of a worldview where every battle had stakes, every choice had weight. Years later, those same lessons would become the heartbeat of Panem. Yet Suzanne wasn't only absorbing war stories, she was staging her own. Friends remembered her vanishing into books or corralling siblings into living room plays. She processed darkness by reshaping it into art. That duality, violence, and imagination was already pulsing through her teenage years. Her formal training began at the Alabama School of Fine Arts, where she graduated in 1980 with a focus on theater. It taught her voice, structure, and the discipline of live performance. She followed with a double major in theater and telecommunications at Indiana University in 1985, studying both the craft of storytelling and the media that carried it. Classmates described her as laser-focused, far more interested in dissecting narrative mechanics than chasing attention. Finally, at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, she sharpened those instincts into mastery. Graduating with a Master of Fine Arts in Dramatic Writing in 1989, she learned to treat dialogue like ammunition, pacing like strategy, and conflict as the engine of every story. One professor put it simply: Collins understood instinctively that conflict is the engine of story. This was the crucible of her early life, the lessons of a soldier, the training of an artist, the mind of a strategist. Long before she imagined Katniss Everdeen, Suzanne Collins was already learning how survival and storytelling could intertwine, and how war, spectacle, and rebellion could become the stuff of myth. Fade into the bright colors and upbeat jingles of 1990s, Nickelodeon, a world of slapstick humor and Saturday morning cartoons. It might seem like the farthest place from Panem's Reaping Square, yet this is where Suzanne Collins first cut her teeth as a professional storyteller. Fresh out of NYU, she landed writing jobs on hit kids shows like Clarissa Explains It All and Little Bear. Her scripts captured the voices of children with uncanny precision, mixing warmth with subtle lessons about responsibility and resilience. She had a knack for dialogue that felt effortless on screen, a skill she'd carry into her novels years later. Her reputation grew quickly. Collins added credits on the mystery files of Shelby Woo, Oswald, and Wow, Wubsy, shows that defined a generation of childhood television. She eventually became head writer on Clifford's Puppy Days, steering entire seasons of storytelling and proving she could balance creativity with the demands of production deadlines. In 2001, she also earned industry recognition with a Writers Guild of America nomination for Santa, Baby, a Christmas special she co-wrote. By this point, Collins had proven she wasn't just another staff writer, she was a storyteller capable of shaping worlds, whether for preschoolers or preteens. But it was during this period, surrounded by scripts, deadlines, and animation boards, that she felt a new pull. Encouraged by fellow writer James Proimos, she began to consider books not just 30-page scripts or half-hour episodes, but expansive worlds she could fully control. The idea terrified her, but it also thrilled her. For Collins, it was the difference between being a voice in someone else's universe and becoming the architect of her own. That leap of faith would lead her underground, literally. In 2003, she published Gregor the Overlander, the first book in what became a 5-part fantasy series known as the Underland Chronicles. Inspired by Alice in Wonderland, Collins asked herself what might happen if a child fell not down a rabbit hole, but through a New York City grate into a hidden world beneath the streets. The result was a story of giant bats, warrior cockroaches, and a reluctant hero, Gregor, who discovers his role in a prophecy of war. The series ran from 2003 to 2007 and quietly built a loyal following. Critics praised her fast-paced writing and ability to weave themes of destiny, family, and sacrifice into a middle-grade fantasy adventure. For Collins, it was proof she could command not just a half-hour episode, but an entire fictional universe. The Underland gave her the confidence and the craft to attempt something far more ambitious. That foundation would prepare her for the spark of an idea that arrived only a year later. An idea that would catapult her from a respected children's author into a global household name. It began, as so many revolutions do, with a spark. Late at night, Collins was flipping channels half between a reality TV competition, half between coverage of the Iraq War. The collision of spectacle and suffering struck her. What if entertainment and war weren't separate? What if they were fused into one brutal ritual? That haunting question would ignite the Hunger Games.
The actual moment when I got the idea for the Hunger Games, I was lying in bed late at night one night and I was channel surfing. And I found myself going in between reality television programs and footage of the Iraq War. And these images sort of began to meld together in my mind in a very unsettling way. And that's when it sort of struck me, this idea for the games.
In 2008, after about a year of drafting and revising, Scholastic Press released the first novel in what would become a trilogy. Collins had signed a major deal with Scholastic earlier that year, a reported six-figure contract for North American rights to 3 books, secured after a heated submission process that saw multiple publishers interested. Her editor at Scholastic, David Levithan, worked closely with her during revisions, helping to sharpen the pacing and emotional intensity that would become the trilogy's signature. Collins pulled inspiration from Greek mythology, the tale of Theseus and the Minotaur, where Athens was forced to send its youth to be sacrificed.
Probably the first inspiration from the Hunger Games came from the Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. When I was a child, I was a fanatic about Greek mythology, and this was one of my favorite myths. In it, Minos, who is the king of Crete, in part of the punishment, Athens has to send 7 youths and 7 maidens to Crete, where they are thrown into the labyrinth to be devoured by a monster called the Minotaur.
She layered in Roman gladiatorial games, the authoritarian structures she'd studied through her father's military lens, and the voyeurism of modern television. The result was Panem, a fractured nation ruled by spectacle, where children fought to the death for the entertainment of the capital. The book hit like a thunderclap. The Hunger Games debuted in September 2008 and within 14 months had 1.5 million copies in print. By 2010, it had spent over 60 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Teens, parents, and critics alike were stunned by its rawness. Author Stephen King called it a violent, jarring speed rap of a novel that generates nearly constant suspense. Collins's style, short clipped sentences, relentless pacing, cliffhanger chapter endings, made the book almost impossible to put down. Her background in scriptwriting gave the prose a cinematic immediacy, as though each scene was written to be watched, not just read. Readers devoured it, teachers debated it, and soon Hollywood came calling. With the breakout success of the first book, Scholastic fast-tracked the sequels. Catching Fire arrived in 2009, followed by Mockingjay in 2010, each debuting to massive anticipation and instantly topping bestseller lists. The trilogy was completed in just over 2 years, an unusually rapid schedule that reflected both Collins's momentum and the publisher's confidence in her growing phenomenon. Each book's launch became a publishing event, with midnight release parties, long lines at bookstores, and instant international translations. The success of The Hunger Games was not just in its plot, but in its moral weight. It asked young readers to confront questions about power, propaganda, and survival. It turned Katniss Everdeen into a reluctant hero who resonated far beyond the page, a symbol of rebellion for an entire generation. By the end of the 2000s, Collins's trilogy was not just a publishing success, it was a cultural obsession. That kind of heat drew Hollywood like moths to a flame. In 2009, Lionsgate secured the film rights to The Hunger Games, and Suzanne Collins herself was brought in to co-write the screenplay with director Gary Ross. Unlike many authors who hand off their creations, Collins was determined to protect the integrity of her world. Casting news dominated headlines. Who could embody Katniss Everdeen, a heroine equal parts survivor and symbol? When Jennifer Lawrence won the role, some critics questioned whether she could capture Katniss's raw vulnerability. But when the film premiered in March 2012, doubts evaporated. Lawrence's performance was hailed as magnetic and fierce, anchoring a franchise that would span 4 films. The box office numbers were staggering. The first movie grossed nearly $700 million worldwide. Catching Fire topped even that, earning more than $865 million and becoming the highest-grossing film of 2013 in North America. The final book, Mockingjay, was split into 2 films released in 2014 and 2015, together pushing the franchise's global haul past $2.9 billion.
To snow!
For Collins, the adaptations were both vindication and risk. She had written the screenplays with a heavy hand, insisting the brutality of the games not be sanitized. Critics noted that the films, while PG-13, carried an intensity rare for young adult adaptations. The strategy worked. Teenagers flocked to theaters, parents debated the violence, and the series cemented its place as the defining dystopian blockbuster of the decade. Hollywood had transformed Panem from the page into spectacle, and while Collins stayed out of the spotlight, her creation became inescapable, igniting debates about power, resistance, and the role of media itself. At the height of the Hunger Games frenzy, Suzanne Collins was everywhere and nowhere at once. Her books topped charts, the films shattered box office records, and Katniss Everdeen had become a cultural symbol. But the louder the world celebrated Panem, the quieter its creator became. Collins rarely gave interviews, declining late-night appearances or the press tours that defined other blockbuster authors. While Jennifer Lawrence and the cast dominated red carpets, Collins remained a shadowy presence, stepping out only occasionally for select events. Fans began to wonder, why was the architect of this cultural juggernaut so silent? Part of the answer lay in the criticism. Some educators and parents argued the books were too violent for teenagers, accusing Collins of glorifying child-on-child death. Others accused the films of sanitizing the brutality for mass audiences, dulling the political edge in favor of blockbuster thrills. Online debates raged. Was The Hunger Games a searing critique of media and power, or just another spectacle cashing in on violence?
I'm tuned into Fox to see what they would say, like, post-debate, just to see, like, what they would spin this with. And I realized that Jesse Waters looks exactly like Caesar Flickerman on The Hunger Games. Okay, here's Jesse Waters, and here's Caesar Flickerman. I can't unsee it. I can't unsee it.
Hunger Games is real, by the way. We're living in it. We're living in the Hunger Games. No, that's dystopian. That's a book, blah, 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 blah. We don't have like an actual Hunger Games. Girl. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. Do you think the way we're living right now, in the United States specifically, is normal? Do you think it's normal and okay to be living paycheck to paycheck? For people to go homeless, lose their jobs, and the government just doesn't care. Doesn't care. I'm sorry, but are you paying your taxes so we can fund a genocide across the world? No? Well, you're not a good American citizen. The victors, aka the celebrities, we're blocking them because they are the conduit for us, for the common folk. This is how we're going to get them to listen, so block out 2024.
Collins did little to respond publicly. In one of her rare comments on the subject, she explained, "I don't like to do a lot of talking. I feel that the books should speak for themselves." She also once remarked on the darker themes in her work. "If I write about war, I want to show what war is really like. It's not about glamorizing it, it's about confronting it." After Mockingjay, Part 2 premiered in 2015, she largely disappeared from the spotlight. Unlike many of her peers, she never chased spin-offs or media tours. Instead, she retreated to Sandy Hook, Connecticut, focusing on her family and quietly weighing whether she wanted to step back into Panem or leave it behind for good. The silence was deafening. For years, no new books were announced, no sequels teased. Rumors of writer's block swirled. Collins herself admitted in a Scholastic interview, "I had told the story I wanted to tell with Katniss, and I wasn't sure for a long time if there was more I needed to add." Had Collins said all she needed to say? Was the world of Panem finished? Audiences didn't know it then, but her retreat was not an ending. It was a pause before a dramatic return. After nearly a decade of silence, Collins stunned readers in June 2019 with an announcement. A new Hunger Games book was coming. It wasn't a continuation of Katniss's story, but a prequel. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes would take readers back 64 years before the events of the original trilogy, into the 10th Hunger Games, and into the making of a tyrant young Coriolanus Snow. Released in May 2020, the book immediately dominated charts, selling over 500,000 copies in its first week, despite the challenges of the pandemic. Critics were divided. Some praised the novel's ambition, its examination of propaganda and corruption. Others argued it was slower and less gripping than the original trilogy. On Book Talk, one reader criticized, "This felt like watching Snow study instead of living a story I couldn't connect." Another comment read, "I wanted Katniss-level intensity, but instead it dragged for pages." Yet praise also surfaced, with fans calling it a chilling look into how power corrupts and a brilliant expansion of Panem's history. But Collins herself explained her reasoning clearly. "With this book, I wanted to explore the state of nature, who we are, and what we perceive is required for our survival." The prequel also carried an eerie timeliness. In an era of political unrest and widespread distrust in leadership, the story of a young Snow grasping for power felt uncomfortably relevant in 2020. Collins noted, "The questions about humanity, about the social contract, are ones we keep returning to. They never go away." Then came the film adaptation. Lionsgate again brought Collins into the fold, and in November 2023, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes premiered worldwide. Directed by Francis Lawrence, it introduced audiences to Tom Blyth as Coriolanus Snow and Rachel Zegler as Lucy Greybeard. The movie grossed nearly $340 million globally, not the juggernaut of the original trilogy, but a successful revival that proved Panem still had an audience. For Collins, it was vindication that her world could sustain new stories beyond Katniss. For fans, it was proof she wasn't finished with Panem just yet. On social media, one TikTok review summed it up with praise. "Collins proves she still knows how to rip our hearts out. This book made me rethink everything I thought I knew about Panem." Just when fans thought Panem's story had closed, Collins lit the fuse again. In June 2024, she announced Sunrise on the Reaping, a brand new Hunger Games novel set during the 50th Games, the very event that made Haymitch Abernathy a victor. Published in March 2025, the book shattered expectations, selling more than 1.5 million copies in its first week, including 1.2 million in the US alone. Collins explained her inspiration in interviews. "I was fascinated by the idea of propaganda, how narratives are shaped, how history is written and rewritten. Haymitch's Games offered the perfect lens to explore that." The title itself was drawn from a line by philosopher David Hume about the ease with which the many are governed by the few, underscoring the book's focus on control and consent. The reaction was explosive. On TikTok, one viral critique read, "This feels like Collins is recycling the games we already know Haymitch deserves more." Another argued, "It's dark and heavy, but maybe too much, so I miss the spark of Katniss's rebellion." But there was praise as well. This is Collins at her sharpest, showing us that the Hunger Games are not just battles, they're battles over truth itself. The adaptation was fast-tracked. Lionsgate confirmed the film version, The Hunger Games: Sunrise on the Reaping, is slated for release on November 20th, 2026, with Francis Lawrence returning to direct. A sprawling cast including McKenna Grace, Maya Hawke, Elle Fanning, and Ralph Fiennes was announced, signaling the studio's confidence in another blockbuster chapter. For Collins, the book's success and its rapid Hollywood translation proved that nearly 2 decades after Katniss first volunteered as tribute, Panem was still a living, breathing mirror of our world. And for fans, it was a reminder that every reaping still carries new horrors and new lessons. As the cameras fade from Hollywood premieres and the noise of fandom quiets, Suzanne Collins returns to something more ordinary. Today, she lives in Sandy Hook, a village in Newtown, Connecticut. There, she keeps her private life fiercely guarded, surrounded by family. Collins was married to Charles Cap Pryor from 1992 until their reported separation in 2015. And they share 2 children, Charlie and Isabel. Unlike Katniss or Snow, her family has remained offstage, protected from the spectacle. Even now, Collins avoids the limelight. She rarely grants interviews and prefers to let her work carry the conversation. But her silence doesn't mean her mind has stopped turning. With Sunrise on the Reaping heading to theaters in 2026, speculation swirls. Will she continue to mine Panem's history or pivot to entirely new worlds? For now, she's given no promises, only hints, like this. There are always new questions to ask about power, about justice, about who we are. Fans on TikTok continue to debate what her next move might be. One skeptical post read, "She'll never top Katniss, this is the peak." Another countered, "Every time we doubt her, she proves us wrong." Panem isn't finished until she says it is. What we know for certain is that Suzanne Collins changed the landscape of young adult literature forever. She turned dystopia into a mirror of our own culture, showed how spectacle can both entertain and oppress, and gave a generation the rallying cry of the Mockingjay. From a military child to a Nickelodeon writer to the mind behind a multi-billion-dollar empire, her journey is as unlikely and as riveting as any of her characters. As we step back from Panem's arena, one truth is clear. Suzanne Collins exposed not just the cruelty of Panem, but the fault lines of our own world. And her greatest creation may not be Katniss or Snow, but the unresolved questions she leaves us with, about power, about survival, and about who we become when forced to choose between submission and defiance. If Suzanne Collins' story gripped you, there's more rebellion ahead. Subscribe here to keep following the rise, the fall, and the exposed truths behind the authors shaping our culture. And next, don't miss our deep dives into Rebecca Yarros and Sarah J. Maas, 2 names sparking just as much obsession, backlash, and debate across book talk and beyond.